This is an interesting topic because our very nature of selling has changed. And because the nature of selling has changed, along with it, the amount we take in has gotten less. And as a result, the amount we get to give has also gotten less. But how do we get back to maintaining this purpose in this journey? First, we have to be creative. And in creativity, I simply mean that you need to start reinventing yourself in some new and unique ways. Not always does everybody want to go along because we've heard enough motivational talks over Zoom and any number of platforms over the course of the last 3 months. People are asking us, how frequent should we do this? How often should I engage in the personal and the professional, even the spiritual lives of our people? The bottom line is that the motivation that has literally been pulled out from human productivity is at an all-time high. And so I want to walk you through a process. We'll deal with that which works, that which has always worked. We'll explore what are some of the things we need to change. And then we'll try to calibrate and evaluate, because it's a global space now and we're all behind these digital platforms. How can we change some of our will and skill to become those 24-hour champions? But let me start with an anecdotal old sales. There was a convention one time and a sales manager got up, and just like I am, he was trying to rally the troops. So he said something very profound that got them jazzed up. He said, "Who has the best product in the world?" And the thousands plus in attendance rallied, "We do." And he said, "Who has the best marketing in the world?" And they shouted, "We do." He said, "Who has the best sloganeering in the world?" I said, "We do." "Who has the best quality control in the world?" "We do." And the list of affirmations kept growing. Finally, he just broke down and said, "Then why aren't we selling anymore?" And one guy sheepishly yelled from the back, "Because the dogs don't like it." It was a pet food company. And sometimes when we look at the things, sometimes the dogs don't like it. I remember Terry Bradshaw used to tell the story of how once in a football game, everything was scripted. And coach had said, "Okay, you know what? We're going to just run the ball." And I think it's still the record for the largest number of plays from scrimmage of just running the ball. They got all the way up to the 1-yard line, and I think they had consecutive running plays. And the coach called Terry Bradshaw to the side and said, "Give it to Rocky Blyer." And he said, "Let him punch it in. Let him earn the reward for that which he's done." After 3 plays, Terry Bradshaw called audibles from the thing, and he basically said he was calling something different from what the coach wanted. And the coach called him to the side and said, "Why are you not giving the ball to Rock?" And Terry pointed to the sideline and said, "Rock's on the side throwing up. He doesn't want the ball." See, some of us have carried a load and we're still asked to do more. And you may be in that category. You may have carried the load for your company during good times, and during the rough times, the load is again on you. And you may not want the ball. You may just want to relax. So this is for you. For those of you who haven't carried the load and now have a chance to actually become a peak performer, this is for you. For those of you who are in management looking to motivate your staff, this is for you. I was trying to create a thread that would allow us to have some kind of universality in this approach. So start thinking of your questions as we navigate through this, and then we will try to get as far as we can during the course. But I've got 5 moods I want to share with you. The first is what's new and what works. The 3 components of sales, if you want to reignite yourself, are still the same. The first is price, the second is value, and the third is belief. Now, value, according to Dennis Waitley, is in the doer, not the deed. So if you want to change your mindset and reignite yourself, you need to ask yourself, what do you bring as a value add to the proposition, instead of looking at all the negativity around. Yeah, all you have to do is switch on the evening news to know that everything is going to go to heck in a handbasket and you and I don't have a prayer. Maybe the only thing we do have is a prayer. But value is in the doer, said Waitley. The price issue is the same thing. The price issue has been the same throughout the history of humanity. Selling has always revolved around the price issue, but I want you to watch me carefully. When you make a proposition, either digitally or in person, when you walk into a room and say, "This is what I have to offer, your price is here and your value is here," It is up to you to tilt the equation to make sure that in their mind, the perceived value has now exceeded the price you are charging. This is belief. This is belief in your ability to offer a good product or service and your ability to stay ahead of the curve. I remember when this contagion began, I got a call from a client who asked me if I could do some work for them. See, the qualitative nature of being an expert, everybody's an expert right now, and that's just the qualitative mindset. Hey, all I have to do is get on video, and all I have to do is do Facebook Live, and all I have to do is tweet, and all I have to do is be on LinkedIn, and the business will come in. That's a qualitative mindset because you're thinking activity begets accomplishment. That's like Edmund Hillary climbing the top of Mount Everest and saying, hey, I don't know how I got up here, but it's really tall. That doesn't work. You're confusing activity with accomplishment if you just think that if you get on a bunch of social media platforms, somehow business will find you. No. The belief in the value that you offer has to precede any activity that you participate in. One of the things I said very early on in this contagion was be wary of expertise that comes to you from enthusiastic amateurs. Be sure you hold out and wait for the experienced professionals. Be wary of the expertise that will be thrown your way from enthusiastic amateurs. So when this client called me and asked me if I could do video-based training, I said, what part of my qualitative can I now quantify? I went back in time and said, you know what? I used to be a content writer. I went back and said, I used to be a curriculum designer. I went back and did all of these things to ask myself, can I build more value because of the belief I had in what I had to offer, or was I going to stagnate at where I had arrived? You see, I'm now a speaker and I'm an author, I've written books. Should I really go back in time and reevaluate or try to re-engage with skills that I had 25 years ago? Not only did the client get excited about the fact that I would be involved in it from soup to nuts, I had to now begin to ask myself, how do you quantify that which you want to qualify? Folks, I cannot stress this as any more than I've already done or will continue to do in the days and weeks and months ahead. You have to get out of your comfort zone if you want to be effective. Do not hang on to the laurels of where you have arrived. Go back down a few rungs and say, are you willing to do many more things up and down the supply chain so you can quantify your offering? Remember, you're thinking from profit, but also you're thinking purpose. So that's what's new and what works. In fact, one of the great stories I can remember is a story that took place with my mentor, salesman, Mr. Ziegler. We had just signed a contract with an organization, and I'll leave the company out of it, but it was about a $250,000 deal. The man who had initiated the contract was a big fan of Mr. Ziegler, and he convinced them that we needed to rewrite their sales curriculum, and I was one of the architects in terms of being an author of that program. In fact, I traveled around the country and trained a lot of their people on it. I still remember those days. But the culminating glory was in our conference room in Dallas, where they flew in on a private jet and handed Mr. Ziegler a $250,000 check. The man who had handed the check had now really relived his potential because he thought to his days when he was a salesman selling computer paper, and he was a big Mr. Ziegler fan. And he credits Mr. Ziegler with all his rise to a regional director. Fascinating it was that as we were in that room, that man had with him 5 audio cassettes that were loosely bound with a rubber band and had some of the corners with adhesive of duct tape. They were ragged. He then shared his story. He said, Mr. Ziegler, 30 years ago, I heard you for the very first time and you had audio cassettes. Me and a group of colleagues got together and we each invested $5, and for a total sum of $15, we were able to buy 5 of your tapes. He only had enough information for 5, so he didn't even go for a round number. He produced 5. That's how he thought, future skill. I was in that room looking at a man who is now meeting his legend, a man who is actually reliving his legacy. He's showing the 5 tapes he had in one hand, and on the other hand, he's giving a $250,000 check to the man who had inspired him. Mr. Ziegler was standing there looking at these ruggedy old tapes. And the gentleman said, Mr. Ziegler, will you sign these tapes for me? They're probably just worthy of a museum now. But I remember my other 2 friends who bought this with me flaked out. So I actually got to keep all 5 of them. Mr. Ziegler didn't even miss a beat. He was signing the tapes. He looked up at the gentleman and said, We have newer ones now. I want you to picture what belief is. We have newer ones now. In one hand, he's holding an old antique. In the other hand, he's holding a $250,000 check, but the salesman never quit. He says, we have newer ones now. Then he looked at me and he said, son, I said, yes, sir. He says, how much is our new Secrets of Closing the Sale tape set, the 12 pack? I said, oh, that's $99. He looked at the gentleman and said, see, it's only 99 bucks. You can have new ones. And that man said, I'll take it. And I wrote this man's order up in a room without even giving it away for free. Here's the principle. How much do you believe in what you offer to stick by your guns when you offer it? You can vary a little bit in direction, but don't change your destination. What's new and what works? Value and price will be debated till kingdom come. But belief is non-negotiable. You have to believe that there is a purpose for why you've been called to participate. The second are the timeless truths. Now remember, we're going to give you an outline of this. The profit to purpose outline will be completely given to you as for everybody who registered. It's a nice little PDF, and everything I'm covering here will be offered to you, so don't worry about that. The timeless truths are planning, preparing, performing, and perfecting. Planning is this, it's a non-negotiable. One of the things that I think Lee is on this call, I was with his organization yesterday, and we shared some of those precepts saying that I have inconvenienced myself so that I can plan better. Why? We are now living in a 24/7 digital excursion. There is a new kind of virtue that is going to be required of you if you want to survive in this virtual world. Because you don't have to show up at an office, or because some of us, I mean, it's fascinating, you know, you see all the memes that people who get on Zoom calls, a lot of them wear a nice shirt on top and they're wearing shorts beneath. I'm telling you, there's non-negotiable planning. If you want to feel alive on a call, make the effort to join the old smile, compliment, and handshake club. My folks from the Philippines will tell you, for those of them who are watching, that some days I've done calls for them at 2 in the morning, but I woke up, I made sure I was fresh, I made sure I had a cup of coffee, and I made sure I wore a shirt and a jacket of some kind. Not to impress anybody, but to feel that I have planned, I have prepared, now I can legitimately expect. Now remember, not everybody is going to follow what I say, which means the statistic will still hold true. 97% will remain in the comfort zone, 3% will be in the effective zone. Performing and perfecting. Don't be afraid to be criticized. In fact, I would welcome you in this digital world to get feedback from constructive critics. Get rid of the destructive critics. The destructive critics are the naysayers. They're the ones who will tell you it can't be done. Tomorrow I'll do a call with the folks in India. Monday I'll do a call with a group called Patriot Academy. Part of them is, some of this is commercial, some of this is monetized, but the principle still is, when you perform, make sure you're doing every performance as an eventual paid sales call. Some you'll be monetized for, but that's where you practice. That's where you get the skill. Don't hold out to get that one paid opportunity, by which time you have not done any of the preparation required. And the way you perfect these attributes is practice. When I was coming through the ranks, someone said, preparation makes up for lack of talent. Preparation makes up for lack of talent. Most of you who have followed me and know me for a number of years have heard me make this statement. I'm the biggest no-talented hack you'll find. But I've surrounded myself by excellence that prevents me from failing, but they're constructive critics who point out my flaws. In fact, last time I was given one edict as to how to look at the chat window when the questions are asked, and hopefully I follow that advice, because it was valid advice. What were they doing? They're saying, hey, we are perfecting the performance. So remember that, all right? And the third component is the why behind the how. Now, at this point, I think what we're going to do is we're going to have a model called the Fogg's behavior model put up on the screen, if that will be a part of the shared screen. If it comes up, you'll see what I'm talking about. But in the Fogg behavior model, what you'll see is on the y-axis, you see the words motivation. On the x-axis, you see the word ability. On the y-axis, you see low and high, low to high in terms of your motivation. On the x-axis, you see hard to do and easy to do in terms of ability. Okay, so that's the basic premise. So just, I want you to internalize that and also focus on that action line where it has prompts succeeding above the action line and prompts failing below the action line. By the way, we will also send this to you later on so that if you weren't able to capture it when the screen changes, you'll be able to go back to basics, and we will send this to you. But if you're following along, just draw this somewhere. I'll send it to you as part of another document on changing habits in these times that came from an organization called Hero Technology. All right? So that was a Fogg behavior model, and let me now explain to you the components within it. When your motivation is high and you have convinced yourself it's easy to do, then your impact is higher, but it's above the action line. And I want you to understand this concept, not quantitatively, but qualitatively as well. In your heart, if you want to move and have purpose in this journey while we are making money doing it, I want you to think that your motivation to learn has got to be a high, but your belief that it is easy to learn has also got to be on the other end of the spectrum. So if your motivation is high and your belief that it is easy to do are both at the opposite ends of that graph, your action line and your success is now off the charts. By the same token, if it is low, your motivation is low and you think it's hard to do, your prompts will fail. And that's a very easy graph to understand. Okay, so think low impact, high impact, think motivation, and think ability. All right? Now, once you understand that precept, let's go back to the word of quantity and quality. Right now, we are living in such turbulent upheaval globally. Everywhere around the world, we have changed substance to symbolism. Now, I'm not arguing on either side of the equation. I try to be diplomatic because I know people on both ends of the spectrum. I'm a human behavior guy. I've always studied human anthropology, and I've asked myself why some people succeed and some don't. In fact, I love the words of J. Paul Getty, the oil tycoon. Once he was asked, how do you define success? He said, some people find oil, other people don't. I thought that was very clever because reality does adjust. But we are now gravitating towards escalating communal upheavals because of symbolism, and we are losing the motivation of substance. So this is part of the new journey. In fact, one of the things you've heard me say over and over again on all the webinars I do is I refuse to subscribe to this word new normal. Normal is average. Who would want to be normal? Normal is average. You're not bad, you're good, but effective is above average. In fact, here's something I think I tweeted some time back, and it went simply like this. I said, mediocre people are behind the curve. Miserable people want to flatten the curve. Above average people want to be ahead of the curve. Now, whichever way you interpret that, it's not about whether I wear a mask or not. That has nothing to do. It has to do with the fundamental desire to perform. And the fundamental desire to perform has got to be out of a dignity that comes from substance and not just constant. See, reacting to symbolism will never allow you to respond to substance. So whatever you have, I remember asking Mother Teresa this question when I met her, and I'm not trying to be a name dropper, it was a real question I asked her. I said, how do we know how much is enough? She flipped it around and said, unless you know how much is enough, however much you get, it'll never be enough. And I thought it was quite fascinating. You have to start with a point of what matters. The late, great Ravi Zacharias put it this way. He says, is anybody in humanity willing to stand up and ask a question? Is anything wrong with anything anymore? Is anything wrong with anything anymore? No. We understand fundamentally that there is a right and a wrong. There is a good and a bad. There is a black and a white. There's a yes and a no. So when you get to this why behind the how and you start asking yourself, wherein will my motivation come from? Can I believe something can be learned? Remember when you rode a bike for the first time? Initially, it was hard. You were pretty sure that gravity would get the better of you, and it did. You were pretty sure that you were never going to be able to balance yourself. And you were excited but nervous when your dad or your mom decided to hold the back of the bike because you knew you had structure behind your effort. That structure was so solid and so trustworthy that you decided to challenge the very inability that, or the very inhibitions you had about this thing called gravity. And then suddenly, as they kept pushing you and pushing you, you were getting a little more confident, but you still did not want them to let go. And when they let go, maybe the first couple of times you did fall. But there was that moment between when you had absolute freedom without the control and before peril hit. There was an exhilaration that was born that then overtook the need for a foundation or an anchor. We always need a foundation, but that anchor. And eventually you started saying, let go, not realizing they already had. Why? That exhilaration. And learning has got to be that way, unless in this world of opportunity that is being presented, you include in yourself that absolute desire to learn, that exhilaration, that feeling, that butterflies in your stomach. You'll struggle on that model. Your impact, you'll always wonder. Okay? Let's look at two more components, and I think we're doing good on time as well. The person and the professional. Now, in a book called Top Performance that I had the privilege of contributing to with Mr. Ziegler, we articulated these things. We said standard performance is what you're paid to do. Remember, we're thinking from profit to purpose, right? From profit to purpose. And some of you may have just caught on that this is slightly backwards, and it's by design. Because our natural tendency is when I get passionate about something, when I get all my ducks in a row, that's when I'm going to begin my activity, and that activity will eventually lead to, I'm going to assume that wherever you are, you're profitable. That's a huge leap. But if the world is changing and they're convincing us that everything is going to now ascribe itself to a new way of thought process, why don't we begin with the thought process that yesterday did end with last night? Why don't we begin with the thought process that, hey, if the playing field is level, I'm going to begin by believing that I'm profitable for this endeavor. See, when that client approached me to write their curriculum, we did it, we articulated it, we gave them a price, whatever that price structure is. And if you need to talk to us, we can talk you through some of those components as to how we took our on-site presence and then took our off-site presence that would be digitally, and how we tried to create value between the two and create a price structure that was fair. Remember, equality in selling is a myth. Fairness is what works. You have to ask yourself it's fair because, as Stanley Marcus said, a sale is not complete until the product or service never comes back, but the client does and brings someone else to you. So one of the caveats we put is, hey, we're going to do a good job for you. You've reached out to us because we're professional, but because of this adjustment, and I get this from Tom Neeson, I think he's watching as well. But Tom Neeson says anytime he's had to make an adjustment in the offering because he wanted to do it for the right reason or believed they asked for the right reason, he always insisted that they give him one other referral. That's a good way. It's a good, productive way to be. So let's look at the performance components in this. So just to finish that story with that client, once we got the money in-house, I suddenly realized that, hey, if I just gave them standard performance, what they have paid me to do, they should be okay. They understand we're in lockdown. They understand that businesses are closed. They understand that I may have to videotape myself after I write it myself, and maybe Shelley helps me edit it, but everything will be done remote. So they understand that if I produce a substandard product, no harm, no foul. Technically, I met their expectations. That's standard performance. Standard performance is when you meet the expectations you're paid to offer, you're paid to deliver. Now, value performance, which is level 2, is when you exceed their expectations. So one of the things we offered was, we said, in addition to this, we will offer you 4 webinars. In addition to this, we'll offer you an outline for everything. In addition to this, we will send you an archive of our resources. In addition to this, we'll be accountable to you once a month by way of email. Whatever it is, we built the arsenal. Now, in standard performance, this is what you are paid to do. In value performance, this is what you have now prepared to do in addition to what you're paid to do. Did you hear that? A, you're paid to do something. B, you're prepared to do more because you want to establish value. Now there's a third category which will take you from profit to purpose, which will set you and it's benchmark. The very word is benchmark, which means now you become the new standard by which they judge and do other business in the similar realm. That's a different kind of thinking. So what we did in this arena was I went to some people who were experienced videographers, people who are award-winning, people who have already established their credibility in that space where I was going to participate and be a novice. Now hear me carefully. If I had given a video of myself on an iPhone with an added microphone, odds are because they got it for less and it was delivered at a time they needed it and I met all those expectations, no harm, no foul. But the digital medium, everything is for posterity, which means out there in this virtual ether would be my video clips that were produced with a substandard talent of videography, i.e. me. So I reached out to this person who's an award-winning person and I said to him, this is the budget that was given to me. Based on the amount I charge them, I have to now, this is what I can offer you. Can you do it? My idea was I would offer it to 3 or 4 people who all had different levels of proficiency in this arena. Bottom line, the man who agreed was an award-winning person. He came up, he set up shop. The client loved it because within their existing budget, they got exceptional value. This is the third component of the other principle I teach, which is called givens, uncontrollables, negotiables. The givens of this world are the laws of the land, the policies and procedures of the county government. They say, hey, it's a pandemic, you're in lockdown, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this, otherwise you'd be in violation legally. The uncontrollables are, we may have a second wave, a third wave, whatever happens, things change. All I can do is the negotiables. And the negotiables allow you to look from profit to purpose. Here's why. Purpose begins at this benchmark level. Purpose begins when you now become the established guideline. So, and lastly, the win-win-win. Now, historically, we have always heard the word win-win. And win-win itself produced a dilemma for a lot of organizations. I first heard Ravi Zacharias use the word trilemma. He even used quadrilemma. But trilemma is win-win-win. How do you win as a consultant, as a constituent? How does your company win? And how does your customer or client win? Win-win-win. One of the organizations I do a lot of work for locally in Dallas actually has win-win-win in big letters right when you enter their office. They say you have to win as an employee, you have to win as a customer, and we have to win as a company. So the trilemma here is how do you go through that win-win-win? All right? So I wanted to put those precepts together and just run through them real quick, give you one illustration and maybe open it up to questions because again, it's a Friday. But one of the beauties of it is I don't decide now which day would be better to do these. I do them on Saturday, I do them on Sunday because everything is one long day or one long week. At the start of this, I wanted to give you a quote. And the quote was by Mr. Ziegler, who said, selling is either the easiest working, most lucrative profession or the hardest working, most frustrating one. I never understood that principle till he gave a corollary to it, saying the first appointment you have every morning is with yourself. And in these days, it's becoming incredibly hard to make that first appointment with yourself because you're surrounded by family, you're surrounded by work, you're surrounded by anxiety, you're surrounded by regulation, you're surrounded by doubt, and just about everything prevents you to get up and go. This is where discipline comes in. Sybil Stanton, who wrote the book, The 25-Hour Woman, said, discipline is not on your back needling you with imperatives, it's at your side encouraging you with incentives. To which I added, the day you make yourself a slave to discipline, the world will become your oyster. So the key here is beginning to understand that it takes an inordinate amount of fortitude to begin to ask yourself, what can I do to grow more so I can give more? The principle is still the same. The principle we have used in our business that many of you who are fans of the organization that I used to represent and where I cut my teeth is you can have everything in life you want if you just help enough other people get what they want. So some of the times you may have to do because it's the right thing to do. There are many pastors in India that I work with that I just send stuff to them, but my heart breaks because most of their constituents don't even have the electronic methodology. So they are more perplexed that they are receiving the information but are unable to give it out. So find ways to make sure that you're investing in the lives of other people. Make that purpose supreme. Also, one of the cool stories that Mr. Ziegler does is a story of Johnny the shoeologist. So I won't tell you the story. I've always enjoyed telling it, but what I've done is as part of our outline to you, we put a link on there, which is called the shame close, but Mr. Ziegler tells it more brilliantly. But it's about a guy who shined shoes and the sales lessons he learned from someone. I wanted to anchor this last part of our discussion on this. Who are the conduits of information for you at this point? You'll begin to realize that a lot of what you thought was non-essential suddenly became essential. You actually, remember, one of the words that was given to us early on was garbage in, garbage out. And one day on my morning walk, I saw some folks picking up garbage. And I thought to myself, I said, wow, a garbage collector is now deemed essential. Guess why? We produced more garbage during the contagion than we did elsewhere because we were a disposable society, everybody's at home. So I made it a point now on my morning walk to at least tip my hat to the garbage collectors. No longer do I simply believe garbage in, garbage out, but I also have to believe that garbage out is someone else's in. Your garbage out is someone else's in. That's how they make a living. So this is a time to now start making some adjustments. Make your adjustment from a humanity standpoint. If you want your profit to be purposeful, don't do it as charitable giving. Do it as conscientious giving. Make sure you're doing it not because you have extra, but you're doing it because it's the right thing to do. By the same token, monetizing it is going to change. You have to make sure that your streams of income are only exceeded by your streams of imagination. Make yourself available to do many things that may be beneath you. In fact, one of the statements attributed early on was, I remember, and I'll hush with this story, but you can start firing off your questions in the chat box as well. But I remember I was walking in somewhere in rural Iowa. I just started traveling with Mr. Ziegler, and I saw a shoe shine guy. And I went and asked him, I said, hey, if I went and got my boss's shoes from his room, would you still be open? It was about 8 o'clock in the evening. He says, oh, sure, man, business has been slow, but I'll wait on you. And I said, I'll make it worth your while. So he waited. I ran up and I asked Mr. Ziegler, can I borrow your shoes? I need to get them shined. He looked at me and he says, why would you do that? I said, well, I remember one time you telling me in one of your talks that if your shoes are shined, you put a little pep in your step, you get a little bounce to your ounce. I'm selling product at the back of the room. And I think if you're excited in the front of the room because your shoes are shined, I guess we'll sell more and I'll make more money. It was just a stretch. I had no idea what I was doing. I don't know why I even went and asked him. And then years later, I realized why. You know, maybe let me finish this story and then I'll tell you the principle. I took his shoes to be shined. Some years later, we were getting ready to do something and he called me up to the front and they made me the person they were going to do that with. And he says, I want you to know, for those of you who are wondering why I picked this little kid from India. He says, there's no job that I'm going to give him he'll say is beneath me. Yet there's no job so big that he'll say that's beyond me. He's going to approach each and I'm pretty sure he'll deliver. That I hung on to that. There's no job that's beneath me. There's no job that's beyond me. If you don't think that way, you're going to become a statistic at this time. You have to be willing to do what is beneath you, and you have to be willing to learn what is beyond you. Otherwise, you're going to become a statistic. And so many years later, when I had achieved that fame, when I had achieved that prominence, we were at the Georgia Dome, 35,000 people. I just finished a seminar. This time he waited for me. Otherwise, he always left early. I went earlier, came back later because I had to do on-ground stuff. But this time he says, I'm going to wait for my boy. And this was many years after our journey had happened. So he was sitting in the limo. I finished at the Georgia Dome and I walked into that limo and I started crying. The weight of the world just fell off. I had now arrived. And I looked at him and I thanked him. I said, Mr. Z, how can I ever thank you for this investment you made in this little immigrant's life? And I'll never forget what he shared. He said, son, all I did was open one door, but I trained you so well, you ran in looking for light switches. All I did was open one door, but I trained you so well, you ran in looking for light switches. See, that's what profit to purpose is. We have to figure out in the dark rooms that we get one light. Are we going to look for other doors? Are we going to look for other lights? Are we going to take some of that light and give it to others who are still dark? That's the momentum. Here are some questions. And okay, that was a powerful gesture. Following thought was, okay. As a small business owner, I'm trying to decide between hiring sales reps versus doing it myself. Is there an advantage that comes with representing my own company? At what point do I hire others to represent me? The point will come, thanks for that question. The point will come when you have to evaluate how good of a job are you doing it. Now, here's the principle. If what is feasible drives what is desirable, a strategic intent is impossible. So as a small business right now, it may be feasible to do your work yourself. Now, Shelly and I are pretty much the staff at Skylife Success, but she does a lot of the background work. And as I kept piling stuff onto her, part of my decision to do stuff was because of feasibility. Hey, times are tough, maybe we need to do more with less kind of thing. But there comes a point when if you want excellence, keyword, if you want excellence, you're going to have to pay for it. Now, the best way at the short term is split the difference. If people are looking for an opportunity, those that do not have an opportunity also need an opportunity. So what you may be able to do in these difficult times is split the difference by saying, hey, I'll take care of some of the load, which means you may not have to pay the full amount. You may be able to pay half the amount. Better yet, one of the organizations I was talking to said, they changed the dynamic of how they offer incentives. They made the salespeople buy into the outcome. See, gone are the days of womb to tomb. Gone are the days of dental benefit and mental benefit. Even when I became a VP of sales for an organization, I insisted that my commission be 70% and my salary only 30%. I always wanted to be hungry, but I'm a salesperson at heart. And those people are out there. They're called eagles. Tom Hopkins says, eagles have been available in every economy since the beginning of man. Finding an eagle is a harder process, but they will be invested in your future. The people who just want security are people looking for their own convenience and not your excellence. So you can split the difference. I do a lot of selling myself because I love doing it. But the reason it's easy for me now is I have never stopped prospecting. So that's one thing I would encourage you to do, but split the difference and hopefully that helps. All right. Any other questions, please let them come up as we're talking. All right, this is from Jason. He says, hi, Krish, I'm a small business, one-man training and development company, Leader Serve Consulting. I'm the unique selling point. Asset of value of my, after 25 years in the financial services industry, I'm now training leaders of Africa. How do I multiply myself? That's a hard thing to do, Jason, from two perspectives. You don't want to multiply your personality. You want to multiply your results. How do you explain that? Don't try to make miniature you. I failed at this, and that's why I'm explaining to you. When I decided that I would train other people to do what I do, my natural tendency was, hey, it's really easy, I do it. And they would say, no, but it comes easier to you, I can't do it. So you have to realize that everybody has an asset ratio within them that is based on their primary behavior style. Some people are analytical by nature. So within the financial services industry, the analytical nature should never be let go. Some of us, I've spoken to you a couple of times, some of us are emotional by nature. We're salespeople to the core because, we approach every subject with an open mouth. So that just, but one of the things I would recommend is don't try to find mini yous or mini me. I don't know. Don't try to duplicate yourself. Try to replicate your work ethic. And that's easier to do. So what you do is you don't share your persona when you're trying to find other people to do what you do. You share the work ethic it takes. And it's very easy. In fact, one of the segments that we have just added to Skylife is it's called Shelley Says. And in fact, on the outline we sent you, there's an email address there. So if you're dealing with millennial folks or folks in that general age group or people who are slightly different from you in terms of demographics, send an email to us at Shelley Says, and Shelley will also help me answering some of these questions in terms of the time we are in. But the reason for beginning that journey is actually an answer to your question. It is because we're not all wired the same. But in the digital world, our discipline will eventually become the same. Those that thrive in front of a camera will continue to thrive in front of a camera. Those that are behind the scenes will continue to thrive. Those that are comfortable are going to get eaten alive. So when I talk to people about work, I have a litmus test in my mind. If they tell me, I think, that's a person who I know can replicate work ethic. If they say, I feel, that's a person more interested in my notoriety. See, a feeling is usually about the applause and the acknowledgement that comes in. I think is more about the activity and the work that goes into the front. All right. Next question was, given these difficult times, can you share your thoughts on motivation engagement for my sales team? The two things that I would encourage you to do is inspect what you expect and make those time frames shorter. In the early days, a sales contest would have a time frame to it, whether it would be a month or a quarter, and then you evaluate it against that. Our motivation was based on reward and recognition and a whole bunch of other variables. But in this new space, one of the things I would encourage you to do is inspect what you expect. Maybe not every 24 hours because that would be micromanaging, but it's not a stretch to inspect what you expect every 72 hours. Don't let 3 days go by when you haven't inquired into workload or effort. The same thing, measure what you treasure. Because, I'll go back to one thing I forgot to say earlier. In standard performance, we said this is what they are paid to do. In value performance, we said this is what they are prepared to do. Benchmark performance is what they are praised to do. Benchmark performance is what they are praised to do. So when I receive praise for work, I quickly realize something. Nobody is going to thank me for the same effort, which means I have to increase my effort in order to be thanked again if I like it. But if the praise is consistent and the praise is constant, but the praise is also not flattery, which means it's genuine, then I can continue to get better performance. So inspect what you expect, measure what you treasure. And suddenly you'll find some amazing things happen. What are your top 3 tips for someone who is not natural at sales? I love this question because we get asked it a lot. In fact, most of what I do, I tell people. I remember one time we had a meeting in one of the companies, and a gentleman raised his hand and right hand up, and he said, "How many of you are in sales?" And the actual sales team raised their hand. He says, "Now I want the rest of you who didn't raise your hands to look at those that raised your hands and make sure you're doing something every day to support them." That's kind of tongue in cheek, but it's not far from the truth. What do I mean? Without salespeople, the world is just a big warehouse with an excess inventory of brilliant ideas that will never be used. Nothing happens until someone makes a sale. When we shared that principle, CPAs, lawyers, everybody started coming to us and saying, "Hey, will you teach me how to sell?" Now, for those of you in professions where you're not in natural selling, you still have to offer the enthusiasm that comes with what you do. Life is not a spectator sport, no matter what business you're in. Even a doctor does something to convince you to tell other people. I know many practices that will say, "Hey, we'll give you a referral if you refer someone." My dentist does that. I mean, I'm not running around the world looking for people with rotten teeth so that I can recommend them to my dentist. But what is he saying? He says, "I've got to fill the pipeline." So sales mindset is different. Jay Helwig, a good friend of mine, was once asked the question, "What's the best sales close you ever learned from Mr. Ziegler?" And I remember his answer. He says, "I never learned a sales close. I learned a sales attitude." That principle will help you. You don't need to know how to close sales and learn process if you're in a profession which is not naturally sales driven, but always be closing A, B, C. Otherwise, you're just a professional visitor. You always have to be closing in some way. All right. Thank you, Frank. First appointment reminder. I missed my Automobile University days. All right. Sure. Okay. I have a sales team that has been doing an amazing job for the past 90 days, but over the past 10 days, I'm seeing call fatigue set in. Any advice? Great question. We dealt with this with an organization last week. Call fatigue and any kind of, let me back up and put it differently. When you see a behavior change, either suddenly or gradually, whether it's personal or professional, you have to understand that it was never because of something that happened. It's a long series of slow leaks that were never plugged. Behavior that is rewarded will be repeated, but the reward has to be personal and it has to be intrinsic to the one receiving it. So in this day and age, one of the things that we can do that we have never been able to do before is we can reach out to the people individually, either working remotely, and ask them what motivates them. Find what motivates people on an individual level. And then you'll begin to realize that maybe some of the discussions we had were based for all people for the 90 days. And as a result, some of the individuals started falling through the cracks. Now, the principle I shared with another group yesterday, but I'll repeat that. The principle of motivation for any team is the 20-60-20 principle. What does that mean? Simply put, 20% of the people on any team are smarter than you, smarter than me. By influencing them or trying to include them in anything, we're actually slowing them down. I need to know who my mavericks are and just leave them alone. I need to realize that 20% of the people on any team are not going to be motivated. They're just there, that's just it. But what I do is my ego and many other egos try to slow down the top 20 so we can get them to be the example for the rest. We try to accelerate the bottom 20 because our ego will never let us admit we made a bad hiring decision. And we ignore the middle 60. And that's where you see this long-term drop-off. The middle 60, who your bread and butter, the salt of your organization, have to be praised more regularly than the top 20 and the middle 20. They don't need it because they don't ever crave it. They're behind-the-scenes people. But while we are chasing the top 20 and trying to accelerate the bottom 20, the middle 60 are leaving our organizations and using our computers to send out their resumes. So be cognizant of that. But ask yourself, where were the breaks along the way and what could you have done? The key thing in the digital world is make sure that the compartments of compliments are much more condensed, which means you're doing them at a greater frequency in a variety of ways. You don't have to praise everybody all the time. And here's the thing, surprise people with generosity. Remember, profit to purpose, surprise people with generosity. If someone agrees to do something and that's part of their job description, it's not a bad idea. And again, this I learned from Tom Neeson, from our corporate clients, but I started doing it personally as well. Just for a corporate client, you can send a thank you that's handwritten or a gift card or something like that. But even in your organization, it's not a bad way to now start treating your internal customers the same way we've treated our external customers, right? Okay, love the training, facilitation part of that. All right, one last question. I think we have time for two more, and otherwise I have some questions that came in earlier, but I don't want to ignore those that are already on the call. So if anybody has a question, go ahead and put that in. If not, one of the questions that came up was, what are the top 3 things or something? What are some of the things that I can do on a daily basis that what are some of my top 3 disciplines? One of the things is I would read more about your competition in whatever you're offering. I would read more about your competition and become an expert on what your competition is doing. Now, mine is part of the self-help world, so it's a little more open-ended, but you need to ask yourself what other people are doing. Your customers are getting keener, your clients are getting keener, are you? The second, try not to listen too much to information that irritates you. And I know this is hard to do because we are voyeuristic by nature. It's called the mock effect. They say that a car that has its lights flashing is 7 times more likely to hit on the side of the road than one without any lights on it. We gravitate towards light and sound. It's part of our natural tendency. So our natural tendency as voyeurs of information is to consume stuff that irritates us. In the old days, Frank brought up Automobile University. In the old days, we say anytime you're in a traffic jam, the first thing you need to do is switch off anything that is heavy metal or opinionated and put something that's soothing. People would say, does that really matter? You're already agitated. You're in a traffic jam. You didn't cause it. You don't know what caused it. By listening to stuff that aggravates you, it'll just increase your energy. I remember in Dallas when I heard that principle, this was before they had the express lanes and all added. This was one of the freeways here was the world's biggest parking lot at rush hour. I used to play tennis in those days, so I'd take a tennis ball and just bounce it on the dashboard. Anytime there was a traffic jam, I'd switch everything off and just bounce a tennis ball on the dashboard. This dude was in the car beside me. He looked in the car. He saw an Indian guy. He was pretty sure I was a doctor. Well, at least he thought I was. He asked me to roll my window down, which I did. He says, do you have one more of those? He thought that there was some great therapy in a tennis ball. No, I did it because I like tennis. And what I simply mean by that principle is that if you want to motivate yourself, invest in the things that are good, clean, pure, powerful, and positive that will give you a natural high, that will release those endorphins, that will give you that internal jogging. So first thing, make sure you're disciplined. Second thing, make sure you're avoiding things that irritate you. And third, learn to integrate. This is the best time in human history to get out of your comfort zone and walk across the street into someone else's effective zone. And I'll close with this principle if there are no other questions. But I remember it was 3 days ago. I was on my morning walk, and I saw a gentleman. He was, he was like me, a fellow immigrant, or I don't know if he was born here, but he distinctly looked different, and his accent also gave it away. But he was walking with a kind of a deliberate look. He was making eye contact with the walkers. Now, I greet people in the morning. I just tip my hat. I wear a hat, so I just do this. Physically, I don't just say good morning. I actually do a physical stroke. It's just habit. I learned from my dad. But this guy was walking, and as we got closer, he never took his eyes off me. And then as we got closer, I said, good morning. He said, I hope you and your family have a blessed day. And he kept walking. And I thought to myself, that was an unusual morning greeting. And then I walked up a little further and I said, let me try, because he had probably crossed those people, right? I walked up a little further and I said, when the guy says good morning, I said, I hope you and your family have a blessed day. He says, oh, you met David. So that's his habit. I hope you and your family have a blessed day. Get out of your comfort zone and stop listening to that which irritates you and start doing that which integrates you. And suddenly you'll move from symbol to substance. All right? So that's all I had. I know a lot of you have joined, and a lot of you, I'm looking at a couple of screens full here, and thanks a lot for those of you who did join. I appreciate the benefit you give me just of ears, that many people would register to watch me on a video. But if you want me to do more of this, I love doing Q&A. We have an Ask Krish segment that we do every couple of weeks. Join us on that. Like I said, for the first time in human history, there's no subject off limits. We're going to try to address it all, and we're going to try to do it. All right. God bless everybody, and thanks a lot. And if you have any questions that are specific, in the outline, you can send one to Shelley Says if you want questions on the millennial component. Anything else you need from us, just ask. And if we don't have the answers, we'll go get them for you. Until next time, good day, happy selling. Bye-bye.